The silence in the Miller-Crest Building was the kind that had its own weight. Built in the late 1960s, the 15-story tower was a monolith of stained concrete and dark glass, and by midnight, it belonged entirely to Sam. He was the sole night security guard, a man whose job consisted of walking empty hallways, checking locked doors, and watching a bank of flickering monitors that showed nothing but shadows and dust motes. It was a tedious job, the kind where you learn to listen to the building itself. The pipes rattled, the walls groaned as the temperature dropped, and the main elevator, an old heavy cab with brass trim and a mechanical floor indicator, always groaned like it was tired of moving. It was a slow Thursday night when Sam first noticed the glitch. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the property manager's office left a note asking him to retrieve a box of old tax files from the 4th-floor storage room. Sam grabbed his master keys, stepped into the elevator, and pressed the number 4. The button illuminated with a dull amber glow. The heavy doors slid shut with a metallic clunk, and the cab began its slow, shuddering ascent. Sam watched the mechanical numbers above the door tick upward. 1, 2, 3. Then, nothing. The number 4 never lit up on the overhead indicator. The elevator didn't slow down, it didn't shudder, and it certainly didn't stop. It simply kept rising, the mechanical click sounding a moment later as the number 5 illuminated. The doors opened onto the dark, empty 5th-floor lobby. Sam frowned, stepping out briefly to look around before stepping back into the cab. He pressed 4 again. The button lit up, but the elevator headed straight back down to the ground floor without stopping. He shrugged it off. It was a 50-year-old building. Mechanical glitches were practically part of the architecture. He figured he would just try again tomorrow. The next night, the curiosity turned into a mild annoyance. Sam entered the cab at midnight for his first patrol and pressed 4 clearly, making sure his thumb made solid contact. The amber light flared. He watched the indicator panel intently. 1, 2, 3. The elevator didn't even hesitate. It sailed right past the 4th floor, jumping straight to 5 again. The doors slid open, mocking him with the silence of the 5th floor. Sam felt a strange prickle of unease on the back of his neck. He tried riding it down from the 6th floor, but the result was the same. The elevator treated the 4th floor as if it were a figment of his imagination. The next morning, before his shift ended, Sam decided to ask the day staff about it. He figured the floor was just under renovation, or the button wiring was shot. He ran into Dave, the building's head of maintenance, by the loading dock. When Sam mentioned the elevator skipping 4, Dave stopped wiping his hands on his rag. His face went completely blank. He gave Sam a long, hard look, tossed the rag into a bin, and muttered something about a faulty relay before walking away fast, completely changing the subject. Later, Sam asked the front desk receptionist, a woman who usually loved to gossip. The moment the words 4th floor left his mouth, her smile vanished. She suddenly became very interested in her computer screen, claiming she had an urgent email to file and couldn't talk. The wall of silence only fueled Sam's curiosity. It wasn't until Monday night that he got a real answer. He was in the break room, pouring a cup of stale coffee when Martha, an older cleaning lady who had worked in the building since the late 80s, walked in to change the trash liner. She looked tired, her shoulders hunched. "They won't tell you about it," Martha said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him, keeping her eyes fixed on the trash can. Sam paused, holding the coffee pot. "Tell me about what, Martha? The 4th floor?" Martha stopped what she was doing and looked toward the hallway to ensure they were alone. She stepped closer to Sam, her expression dead serious. Floor 4 used to be occupied by a private accounting firm back in the 70s. Something happened up there. something terrible. A tenant. He never moved out properly, if you catch my meaning. The owners had a hell of a time with the police, and after the investigation, they couldn't rent the space out. No one would stay. So, the board decided to just seal it off. They unhooked the elevator wiring and locked the doors. It's been empty for decades. "Who was the tenant?" Sam asked, leaning in. "I've said too much already," Martha muttered, pulling the trash bag tight. "Just leave it alone, Sam. Some places are better left forgotten." She walked out of the break room quickly, leaving him alone with the hum of the refrigerator. Curiosity was eating at Sam now. It was no longer a matter of a broken elevator button. It was a mystery hiding in the very building he was paid to protect. During his midnight shift, he went into the manager's office and began digging through the old archive cabinets where the building blueprints and historical records were kept. He pulled out the original modern floor directory and the architectural layouts from 1972. As he scanned the documents, a chill crept over him. In the modern directories, the fourth floor was completely missing. The pages jumped from floor 3 to floor 5, as if the space between them had been physically erased from the record. In the older blueprints, the floor was there, labeled as office space, but someone had drawn a heavy black marker line across the entire layout of the fourth floor, scratching out the room numbers until the paper was nearly torn. He couldn't help himself. Sam grabbed his heavy Maglite flashlight, hooked his keys to his belt, and bypassed the elevator entirely. He went to the main stairwell. The concrete stairs echoed with the sharp sound of his boots as he walked up from the lobby. 1 flight, 2 flights, 3 flights. When he reached the landing for the fourth floor, he stopped. The heavy steel door was there, but it looked entirely different from the others. While the doors on 3 and 5 were painted a clean, modern beige, the fourth floor door was covered in a thick layer of undisturbed gray dust. Wrapped tightly around the door handle and laced through a heavy steel bracket on the frame was a massive, rusted iron chain. It was secured with a heavy padlock that looked like it hadn't seen a key since the Carter administration. Sam stepped closer, his heart thumping against his ribs. He shone the flashlight beam on the door. The chain was so rusted that flakes of orange metal fell to the floor at the slightest vibration. There was a tiny gap between the heavy door and the rubber weather stripping of the frame, barely 1/4 of an inch wide. Sam hesitated, then leaned his ear close to the gap, holding his breath. At first, there was only the standard building hum, but as he strained his ears, he heard something else. It was faint, buried beneath the acoustic depth of the empty tower. It sounded like static, a low, rhythmic white noise, like an old television set tuned to a dead channel. But as he listened closer, the static seemed to rise and fall in a slow, agonizing cadence. It didn't sound like electronics. It sounded like breathing. A long, drawn-out inhale, followed by a heavy, rattling exhale. Sam jumped back, his heart leaping into his throat. His flashlight beam danced erratically across the concrete walls of the stairwell. He convinced himself it was just the building's old pneumatic pipes, a trick of the airflow passing through an unventilated space. He turned on his heel and walked away, his pace quickening into a near jog as he headed back down to the safety of the brightly lit security desk. He tried to stay calm, but the sound of that rhythmic rattling stayed in his ears for the rest of the night. A few days passed, and the building seemed to settle back into a normal routine. The elevator behaved itself, or rather, it continued to ignore the fourth floor exactly as it was supposed to. Sam avoided looking at the number 4 button when he rode the cab, and he stayed far away from the stairwell. The fear began to dull, replacing itself with the comfortable numbness of routine. He convinced himself he had let an old cleaning lady's ghost story get the better of his imagination. Then came Tuesday night. It was exactly 3:10 in the morning. Sam was up on the 8th floor, doing his standard lockup check on a law firm's main entrance. The hallway was completely dark, except for the green emergency exit signs casting a sickly hue over the carpet. The silence was absolute. Suddenly, a sharp, metallic ding echoed through the corridor. Sam froze. He hadn't called the elevator. No one else was in the building. He slowly turned around and looked down the long hallway toward the elevator bank. The indicator light above the center cab was illuminated. The arrow pointed down. With a heavy, mechanical sigh, the doors slid open on their own. Sam walked toward it, his boots making no sound on the thick carpet. His flashlight was off, hanging from his belt. As he neared the open cab, he noticed the interior light was flickering violently, casting long, erratic shadows across the brass walls. He reached the threshold and looked inside at the number panel. His breath caught in his throat. Every single button on the panel was dark, except for one. The number 4 button was glowing with an intense, angry amber light. It wasn't just lit, it was pulsing, humming softly with electricity. Against every single grain of sense he possessed, against every survival instinct hammered into his brain, Sam felt a strange, magnetic pull. It was as if his legs were moving on their own, guided by a morbid, suffocating curiosity. He needed to know. He needed to see what was behind the chain. He stepped over the threshold into the flickering cab. The moment both of his boots touched the rubber mat inside, the heavy doors slammed shut behind him with incredible force, far faster than they ever had before. Sam spun around, lunging for the door open button, but before his fingers could touch the metal, the elevator dropped. It didn't just start moving. It dropped with a sickening, stomach-churning speed, as if the cables had been severed. Sam was thrown off balance, his knees buckling as gravity pulled at him. The flickering fluorescent lights in the ceiling gave one final, loud pop and cut out completely. He was plunged into pitch-black darkness, descending into the belly of the building at a terrifying velocity. Just as panic was about to drive him to scream, the brakes caught with a violent, screeching grind of metal on metal. Sam was thrown against the back wall of the cab, his shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. The elevator shook violently, then came to a dead stop. The lights didn't come back on. Instead, a dull, emergency amber light flickered to life from the floor indicator above the door. It displayed a single, solid number: 4. With a slow, agonizing groan, the doors began to slide open. They moved sluggishly, as if pushing through decades of resistance. Sam scrambled to his feet, gripping his flashlight, his hands shaking so violently he could barely press the switch. He clicked it on, throwing the bright white beam through the opening doors. The 4th floor was right there in front of him. It looked exactly like the rest of the building must have looked 50 years ago, untouched by time, preserved in a tomb of dust. The floor was covered in old, stained shag carpeting that had faded to a sickly yellowish brown. Desks made of dark wood veneer were scattered across the open space, covered in ancient rotary phones, stacked manila folders, and heavy, rusted typewriters. A thick, blanket-like layer of gray dust covered every single surface, completely undisturbed by human passage. The air was incredibly heavy, smelling of dry rot, mildew, and ancient, stagnant paper. It was freezing cold, so cold that Sam could see his own breath forming white plumes in the beam of his flashlight. He stood in the center of the elevator cab, terrified to step out, terrified to stay inside. As he swept the flashlight beam across the skeletal offices, he noticed a sudden movement in the air. A sharp, violent draft of ice-cold air rushed past him, moving from the dark depths of the office floor straight into the elevator cab. It wasn't just wind. It carried a physical weight to it, a pressure that brushed past his shoulders like an invisible crowd pushing through a narrow doorway. It smelled faintly of old copper and ozone. It felt exactly as if something that had been trapped on that floor for 50 years had just walked out of the dark and into the cab right beside him. Sam couldn't breathe. The air in the elevator felt displaced, thick and crowded, though he could see nothing but the empty space next to him. The elevator doors suddenly slammed shut again, cutting off the view of the 4th floor. The cab didn't move. The lights stayed dead. Sam fell to his knees in the darkness, the crushing weight of the invisible presence pressing down on his chest until everything went black. The next morning, at 6 a.m., the day shift supervisor found Sam. He was slumped in his swivel chair at the main security desk downstairs in the lobby, his chin resting on his chest, fast asleep. His flashlight was sitting on the desk beside him, its batteries completely drained. When the supervisor shook his shoulder, Sam woke up with a violent gasp, looking around the bright, sunlit lobby in total confusion. He had absolutely no memory of leaving the 8th floor. He had no memory of how he got back down to the desk. His mind was an absolute blank from the moment the elevator doors had opened on the 4th floor. The supervisor gave him a strange look and told him to go home and get some rest. But before Sam left, he looked at the digital building log on the main security computer. The automated system recorded every single movement of the elevator cabs throughout the night. Sam scrolled down to the 3 a.m. markers. There, written in plain, unfeeling digital text, was the record of his night. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the main elevator cab had traveled from the 8th floor down to the 4th floor. It had remained there, doors open, for exactly 4 minutes and 44 seconds before returning to the lobby. Sam resigned that very afternoon. He never went back to the Miller-Crest Building. A month later, he ran into Dave, the maintenance guy, at a local diner. Dave sat down across from him, took a sip of his coffee, and looked at Sam with hollow eyes. He told Sam that the day after he quit, the building management had the main elevator completely modernized. They replaced the entire control system, rewired the shafts, and put in a digital touch panel. But Dave told him something else, his voice dropping to a whisper. He said that even with the brand new modern system, the elevator still completely refuses to go to the 4th floor. In fact, the software engineers couldn't even program the number 4 into the digital screen. The elevator has never moved to that floor again. But sometimes, Dave said, when he works late, he stands in the lobby and watches the digital indicator panel. And every now and then, around 3:14 in the morning, the panel will flicker, the modern screen will glitch, and a single ancient amber number 4 will glow in the dark before vanishing back into the night.